Morning, ladies. Happy Labor Day. This week you're going to be reading chapter 3 from the book Women in the New Testament. Chapter 3 is all about St. Paul, and a couple things about St. Paul. First of all, you might wonder, why does Bonnie Thurston start with Paul when the Gospels obviously are first in the New Testament, and Paul's letters are after that? And basically the answer is that Paul's letters were all written before the Gospels were written. So the kind of thinking that Paul has predates the sort of mindset of the people who wrote the Gospels. A little bit about St. Paul, if you don't know about him. He was originally Saul, and he was a Roman Jewish person, and he was a very strict Jew, and so he was part of a group of people who initially were persecuting Christians. And on his way to persecute some Christians, he was trying to go to this town called Damascus and round up Christians and bring them back so that they can be persecuted. He has this conversion experience where he's knocked off a horse and blinded, and he hears Jesus say, "Why do you persecute me?" And then he goes to this town where he meets with some Christians, and that's what kind of leads to his conversion. So he changes his name from Saul to Paul, and there he starts traveling all over the Mediterranean Sea area. And as I'm describing this, I make it sound like this all happened immediately, but this was kind of like a 3-year conversion process before he started traveling. But he went on 4 different missionary journeys, and that means that he traveled around the Mediterranean Sea area, and every place he stopped, he set up a Christian church. And this might sound luxurious and fun. We'd all love to travel the Mediterranean, but at the time it was very difficult. Travel was not easy. It was not luxurious. And this shows a great commitment on his part to spread Christianity. And he kind of spread it to all the ends of the earth, or that's what he describes in his writings. So what would happen is he'd set up a church, and as soon as he felt like they had their own leadership, then he would travel again and start setting up another church. But then when he heard about problems, he would write letters back to these original Christian communities. And so what we have in the New Testament are all sorts of letters written by Paul. And honestly, there's only 7 of them that, the majority of theologians agree Paul actually wrote. And there's more like 13 of them in the Bible that claim that Paul wrote them. And then within those writings, there are other, references to other letters. So it's very possible that Paul wrote more letters than what, appear in the Bible. So the chapter 3 that you're going to read is going to focus on what we call the genuine Pauline letters. These are the ones that we think Paul actually wrote. There's a couple of other categories like captivity letters, which refer to letters that were written when whoever the author was imprisoned. Some of those are also genuine Pauline letters. There are what you call pseudonymous letters, and these are letters that claim Paul as the author, but we think that's more like a pseudonym or a fake name. So anyway, this chapter is focusing on the genuine letters, and it starts with a couple of kind of presumptions. One is that, that these were not written for like a theological sort of base or to give doctrine. They weren't written, consistently, because we don't know the backdrop, we don't know the context, we don't know why Paul has actually written to these people. Also, Paul is definitely writing at a time that's patriarchal, meaning that men are definitely seen as superior to women. And that's just important when you read some of the passages that they'll highlight. And that he's a thinker in process. I like that Thurston uses this phrase, meaning that he's evolving and changing. And so somewhat of what he says in maybe his earliest letter may contradict a later letter. And much is written about Paul when it comes to women, because some of the most anti-equalitarian passages come from Paul's letters. But there are some passages also in Paul's letters that speak to, total equality. And so when we look at the roots for sexism, Paul's letters seem to be highlighted. And when we're trying to figure out if, men should be superior to women, a lot of people will look back to Paul's letters. And, it's just important to realize again that we don't know the context of these letters and we can't know exactly what Paul meant every time as we read these. So enjoy reading about Paul's letters and some of these passages that are important to this issue of women and what women, how women should be treated. And I go back to what I said in a past video. We're always asking ourselves, is this passage descriptive or prescriptive? Is it describing how things were at the time, or is it prescribing how things should always be? Is what Paul said, should it be translated to mean like men should always be superior to women, or is he more kind of describing the way men were superior to women in that time period in history? So you have to kind of question that too. In this video, I also want to mention that you're going to take your first quiz this week. And just so you know, there's 20 questions, and I think you have 40 minutes for the quiz. So I highly recommend that you look over everything first before you start the quiz. Once you start it, you cannot stop it. You can't pause it and go back to it. So make sure that you know that and you give yourself a time where you're not going to get interrupted. If you email me and say, oh, this distraction happened and I wasn't able to finish and it counted the last 10 questions wrong, then that's the grade that you will have. So please allow yourself the time when you won't be distracted. Also, I want to mention the paper that you're going to eventually write at the end of this month. This is going to be a 3 to 6 page research paper, and there are 3 different things that you can write about. All of them deal with the Virgin Mary. So one topic you might consider would be looking at some of the devotions that we have to Mary. One big devotion we have is the Rosary. Another is called the Chaplet of Divine Mercy. A novena is a specific way to pray the Rosary. And you would be looking into the history of those practices and why we pray them and how we pray them. You could also look at some of the specific teachings we have about the Virgin Mary. Some examples are that we believe as Catholics that she was forever a virgin. We call this her perpetual virginity. We believe that she was assumed body and soul into heaven. We call this the Assumption. We believe that when she was conceived in her mother's womb, that she was conceived without sin, and we call this the Immaculate Conception. So you could research the theology behind those, the history behind those teachings. Finally, probably the most popular thing would be to research a Marian apparition. Since the time when Mary was still alive until the present, Mary has appeared to people and has kind of given some same general messages every time she's appeared, and has kind of appeared to the same kind of type of people in the same sort of situation. And so some of the more famous ones are Our Lady of Guadalupe, Our Lady of Lourdes, Our Lady of Fatima. Those are probably the 3 most popular ones. But if you just do a Google search and say Marian apparitions, you'll find a bunch of them. You could group some together and research them. Some that might be interesting would be apparitions that haven't been approved by the Vatican yet. There are only like 7 to 10 of them that have been approved. So those might be interesting. Medjugorje might be interesting because that was more recent. Our Lady of Knock in Ireland is kind of interesting. I think Our Lady of Kibeho in Rwanda is a very fascinating one. But again, a simple Google search will give you some ideas. And for all 3 topics, if you look at the end of the syllabi, you'll see questions that go with them. It's a 3 to 6 page paper. You have to use 4 outside sources. And I will go into more detail about the format for that paper on the next video. Have a great weekend or week.